Take a moment to think back to when you were a child. What was your favorite toy? Why did you like it? Who did you play it with? What did it feel like? And what does it say about you? Toys can tell us a lot more than just about the person who owns them. Beyond that, they're items of material relevance and show us what the values of a society are at any given time. Especially considering the fact that most of the time, children aren't even the ones who purchase toys, it's their parents. So toys can often tell us what values their parents want to pass on to the next generation. Hello, my name is Connor Kelly and I'm a docent here at the Cumberland County Historical Society, and I'm also a graduate of American History at Rutgers University. Today we're going to be exploring the toy room of the Gibbon House and find out what story we can learn from these objects. So this item right here is a small tin kitchen, and it's actually called a Nuremberg style kitchen after the city in Germany, which was the center of toy making at the time. Now, items like these would often be passed from generation to generation, mother to daughter, always daughter. And this item was a wonderful way to acquaint little girls with the basics of housekeeping. You can see we have plates and bowls and mops and laundry. Some fancier Nuremberg kitchens would actually have working water faucets, and you could actually cook little tiny bits of food with a candle under the stove here. The original Easy Bake Oven. Also features a little tiny rat. Now, I'm not sure if that's part of the ideal woman's kitchen, but he's still kind of cute there. Now, this item, as I said, was perfect for acquainting young women with the responsibilities that they would have once they got older. So our next item is a collection of building blocks. Now, building blocks have been around for quite a while, and they've actually been promoted by one of the great liberal thinkers, John Locke, the man who coined the term life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and came up with the ideas of freedom that inspired the founding fathers, was also a very passionate advocate for children's education, and thought that children should best learn by having fun while they're learning. Building blocks are so useful for learning because of the fact that you're combining a knowledge of construction and mathematical building with word building as well. A lot of parents during the 19th century wanted to give their children new opportunities through education. So educational toys became very popular during the time, especially building blocks. These were manufactured by a producer named S.L. Hill in New York. Hill was the first American manufacturer to produce blocks en masse, when in 1858 they patented a technique that would stamp the letters directly onto the wood as a lithograph, rather than what was done before, being painted by hand. Our next item is an item that some of our viewers might have probably owned as a child, and that is a doll. Now, dolls have been pretty common through a lot of different time periods throughout history, although not necessarily for every time period. A lot of times, instead of playing with a baby doll, a little girl might be taking care of their baby sibling. Now, this doll here is a fashion doll, meaning that she's taller and she has more realistic human proportions. And the purpose of this doll was for the little girl to practice sewing clothes for the doll. Now, one could either purchase a whole fashion doll, if you had money to spend, or you could do what this person did, and they only purchased the bisque head. So you purchase the head for a cheap amount of money, and then you use fabric to create the arms and body. So there was always a way for every little girl to play with a doll. By the late 19th century, childlike dolls from Germany overtook the market, and they reflect a larger change in the way that parents viewed their children. These dolls looked younger, representing the way that parents wanted to appreciate and keep their children, their little angels, forever, which was a new idea in the 19th century. So, as we could see, there was a growing consumer market. People wanted these toys, And no matter what amount of money you had, you could afford something, even if it be just the bisque head or an entirely bisque doll. These were called frozen charlottes, and they were about yay high, and they sold for about a penny or a dime. Now, you couldn't dress them or move them around, but it was something that you could put in your pocket and take care of. So, by the end of the 19th century, every girl had the opportunity to get a doll, something that was very new. So our next item is an item not only for all children, but for all ages: ice skates. After the medieval period, until about 1850, there was a period of global climate change called the Little Ice Age, where everything became a lot colder. So one of the popular activities during the early 19th century was ice skating. Ice skating was something that was available to everyone, as long as you had a pond nearby that would freeze during the winter. Now, originally, a lot of these older skates were meant to glide along the surface of the ice, not the kind of ice skating we think of nowadays. Ice skating was a bit of a clunky activity, but it was very popular, being kind of the outdoor equivalent to a ballroom type setting. In fact, a lot of women who were looking to maybe flirt with men would use ice skating as an opportunity to fall down and need someone to help them get back up. So, towards the end of the 19th century, we see a change in the way that people ice skate. Starting in 1865, a skater by the name of Jackson Haynes decides to change his ice skate, adding a tip at the front to allow for quick stops and movements around the ice. Jackson Haynes was very passionate about ballet, and he wanted to incorporate the things he saw into ice skating. And while he was in America, he was laughed out of the country, but his new type of ice skating became very popular in Europe, eventually making its way back home. So our next item is a children's rocking horse. Now, the paint might have chipped off, and the mane and tail might have been ripped away, but there's one thing that we still have, which is the signature underneath. That of one Benjamin Potter Crandall, who was a toy maker that lived in New York City. And he had a legacy as his son, Jesse Armour Crandall, became a very famous toy maker with over 150 different patents during his lifetime. Now, we think of rocking horses today as a toy for both boys and girls, but for a lot of history, girls, or rather, proper girls, weren't allowed to ride on horses. Especially during the Victorian period, it was thought that riding on a rocking horse would be a little too stimulating for girls, in the same way that girls weren't allowed to ride bicycles. Okay. So our next toy is a cast iron bank. These were hugely popular in the 1800s because, first of all, they were very easy to produce. All you need is, well, the cast and some iron to put in it. In fact, a lot of companies that make these will keep the casts and they can recreate them even to this day. This bank in particular was made by a company called Book of Knowledge, and it features a young boy who, when a coin is inserted, will be bucked by the buffalo and a little raccoon pops up. So banks like these were meant to encourage children to be thrifty and save their money, and every time you put something in, something funny happens, haha. But the thing about this toy is that it is almost without a doubt a minstrel toy. Later castings of this bank would see the boy painted with white skin, but it can't be painted over the history that this type of toy has, especially in relation to the company. If you take a look at some of the catalogs with these types of banks from the time, we see a lot of minstrel scenes, we see mammies, and we see a lot of racist caricatures that wouldn't necessarily fly today. Minstrel toys like this one and others show us the values of time periods past, and they show us that people found violence to black bodies to be slapstick and humorous. Later reproductions of this can paint the boy to be white, but it's important for us to know that history. So our next item is 2 pieces from a small porcelain teacup collection. And what I like about this one is that it's actually misprinted. That's Little Miss Moffat. However, it says, "And said, what a good boy am I." It's cute to see that little misprint. Now, we like to think of tea as something that has been around forever. But in the 1700s, tea was still a relatively new thing. We're still looking at the development of modern trade routes, and these items weren't necessarily available to everyone. Tea was considered an item for the wealthy, because not only do you need the tea leaves to brew, but you need clean water to brew it in, you need a fancy tea set, and you need sugar to complement it. So tea itself became a status symbol, and one most often used by women as a way of showcasing their wealth. So it goes on to say that during the 19th century, we start to see people buying tea sets for their little girls as a way of showcasing their wealth. Not only can I afford a tea set, but my daughter is learning the same tradition from her mother. This connotation of tea being an aristocratic drink is eventually what made it an easy target during the Revolutionary days. After all, throwing the tea in the harbor or burning it started becoming a symbol of anti-British rebellion, tea being the items that the British drank. And we start to see at this time the transition away from tea towards coffee instead as the people's drink. So our next item is a children's magic lantern. So for anyone unfamiliar with how these work, it's kind of like a projector in that you turn on the oil lamp down here, smoke comes out here, and you take a clear slide and place it through, and the image is projected onto the dark wall. Now, the technology for magic lanterns had been around since the 1600s, and the earliest recorded magic lantern show happened in America in 1743 on December 3rd in Salem, Massachusetts. However, these light shows were kind of limited because it was limited to the technology at the time, being fire. The magic lantern wouldn't see its explosion in popularity until around the time of the invention of photography, as the study of optics, vision, related to both of these inventions. One new light source was something called limelight, achieved by lighting a piece of limestone until it became incandescent. These new light shows meant that magic lanterns could be used for audiences of thousands of people. And they weren't just for children as well. A popular type of light show was called a phantasmagoria. And this was one that featured ghosts and monsters and smoke machines and all kinds of terrifying images, enough to make a Victorian faint. Luckily, the ones that we have here in our collection are of bunny rabbits and children. Going upstairs and into the toy room, we see our collection of children's dresses dated from 1830 to 1900. Now, these dresses were not just for girls, and in fact, it was common to dress young children alike until the age of breeching, between 4 and 7. Using the same clothes for boys and girls meant that they could be used for all children, making hand-me-downs a lot easier. And skirts were easier to clean for messes and toilet training. Pants were impractical, especially to try to adjust as a child was growing up. To tell the children apart in pictures most often depended on the accessories they were wearing. Girls might have jewelry and bows, and boys might have a rocking horse or a drum. Breeching was considered reaching the age of reason, signifying the boy's step towards manhood, and they would finally be given a pair of pants. Now, looking at all these white dresses, one might assume that these are all just christening dresses. But that might not be the case. It turns out that during this time period, it was actually very common to dress your infants in all white, because it was actually easier to clean. Which sounds insane, but hear me out. When you dye clothes, especially if you hand dye them, it can be very hard to match the color of the dye when you're cleaning. However, it's always easy to match a white because you can just bleach it out. Also, the use of blue chalk was very useful in cleaning out yellows with white fabric, for the same reason that detergent is blue nowadays. It's the opposite color of the yellow, and it helps counterbalance getting a brighter bright. Now, back to the bleach. They obviously didn't have bleach the way we think of it. Rather, they had to find things with high ammonia levels. And the #1 preferred bleach for most launderers was urine. It had a very high amount of ammonia in it, and it was perfect for getting out any kind of stain. All you would do was put some urine on a white dress, and then leave it out in the sun, and the stain would be gone. Many launderers throughout most of history, going back to Rome, have sworn that stale urine is the best for any stain. It took until the 19th century for soap to make its way into the household, mostly because of the high luxury tax on the item. Afterwards, cleanliness standards would improve, and we would find new ways to bleach our clothes. So, the last item we'll be looking at today is called a stereoscope. And the way that this works is that you have an image on the end that's repeated twice. And when you look at it from a certain angle, they form together in your brain to create a 3D image. Now, our brains are capable of doing this without an actual stereoscope. Here's an image that can be seen in 3D without a stereoscope. What you do is you try to cross your eyes and get both parts to meet in the middle. When you cross your eyes, try to get the person to overlay the other person. It may be blurry for a second, but if you get it close enough, your brain will eventually fix it to be fully 3D. The stereoscope technology was new because of the fact that you can only do it if the image perfectly matches itself. So you can only get it with a photograph. The images from our stereoscope come from a collection published by Sears and Roebuck's to advertise their new factory. Factories during the 19th century were a very new thing, and the people of Sears and Roebuck's wanted to advertise all of the new things that they were doing. Now to us, some of the images might seem kind of boring. Oh, they're packaging some items. Oh, they're answering an operator table. But to people of the time, this was riveting technology, and everyone wanted to see what was going on in this factory, especially considering that a lot of toys that people ordered were coming from Sears and Roebuck's catalog. The stereoscope falls in line with a lot of other optic inventions of the time, like the magic lantern we saw. As the inventor of the stereoscope said, Oliver Wendell Holmes, "There is only one Colosseum or Pantheon, but how many millions of potential negatives they have shed, representatives of billions of pictures since they were erected. Give us a few negatives of a thing worth seeing, taken from different points of view, and that is all we want of it." It's easy for us to forget how revolutionary these advancements in technology were, not just for things like the stereoscope and the child's lantern, but also in new methods of production, which opened the door for mass consumption of these toys. The toys of this time period tell us a story. They tell us a story of a society looking to purchase things, looking to give their children a better life, looking to pass on their values through material objects. And most importantly, people who cared enough about their items to preserve them so that we could share them with you today. Thank you very much.